When I first saw Luna, chained and broken, I didn't know how much she would change my life. Rescuing animals is what I do, but Luna was different. Her spirit, despite everything she endured, ignited something in me, a belief in second chances, not just for her, but for all of us. This is the story of how she healed, and how she taught me to heal too. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. The office was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of papers as I shuffled through another stack of adoption applications. It was late, and exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, but I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight wasn't done with me yet. After 15 years in animal rescue, you start to feel it in your bones when something big is coming. My phone buzzed on the edge of my desk, jolting me from my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID, an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment before answering, bracing myself for the kind of call that usually came at this hour. "Sarah Turner," I said, my voice steady despite the creeping dread. The woman on the other end sounded frantic, her words tumbling over each other in a rush. "You've got to help. There's this dog, and it's bad. Real bad. Chained up behind some guy's shed, barely moving. I don't think he's been fed in weeks." My heart sank. Calls like these weren't uncommon, but they never got easier. "Where are you?" I asked, already grabbing a notepad and pen. "Out near Willow Creek," she said, her voice breaking. "I can send the address. Please, you have to hurry. I don't think he'll make it through the night." I scribbled down the address and reassured her that I was on my way. Hanging up, I grabbed my rescue kit and shrugged on my jacket. The familiar weight of my bag, slung over my shoulder, steadied me. This was what I was meant to do, even if it broke my heart every time. The drive to Willow Creek felt longer than it was, the darkened roads stretching endlessly as my thoughts raced. What kind of life had this dog endured to end up in such a state? And why did this call feel different, heavier, like it carried more than just the usual sadness? I glanced at the passenger seat, where a tattered photo of a German Shepherd rested, a dog I'd rescued years ago who hadn't made it. I kept the photo as a reminder of why I couldn't stop, even when it felt like the odds were stacked against us. "Not tonight," I murmured, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Not this one." The address led me down a dirt road bordered by overgrown fields. As my headlights illuminated a rundown property, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The place had an eerie stillness to it, as if even the air had given up. I parked the car and stepped out, the cool night air biting against my skin. The smell hit me first, a sickly mix of rot and decay that turned my stomach. Then I heard it, a faint, pitiful whimper that pierced through the silence. It was the kind of sound that stayed with you, echoing in the corners of your mind long after you'd left the scene. "Hold on," I whispered, more to myself than to the unseen dog. "I'm coming." The dirt crunched under my boots as I approached the shed, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The whimpering grew louder, each broken cry tugging at my chest. Somewhere behind that shed was a dog who had been waiting far too long for someone to care. Dave, one of my longtime volunteers, pulled up behind me in the rescue van. He hopped out, his face grim as he took in the desolate property. "What do we have?" he asked, falling into step beside me. "I don't know yet," I said, my voice low. "But it's bad." The stench hit us first, sour and overwhelming, the unmistakable smell of decay. I swallowed hard and motioned for Dave to follow. Behind the shed, the beam of my flashlight landed on a heartbreaking sight. At first, I thought it was a pile of rags. Then it moved. The dog, a Samoyed, I realized, lay crumpled in the dirt, her once white fur matted with grime and blood. The heavy chain around her neck was so tight it seemed to merge with her skin. Flies swarmed her open wounds, and her ribs jutted out like jagged peaks. "Oh my God," Dave muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I knelt down, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there, sweetheart," I murmured, my heart aching at the sight of her. Her eyes fluttered open, dull but aware, and for a moment, we locked eyes. Her tail moved. Barely a twitch, but it was there, a spark of hope in a body that had every reason to give up. "She's still fighting," I said, my voice tight. "We're not leaving her here." Before I could reach for the bolt cutters in my bag, a voice cut through the still night. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dave, and I turned to see a man stumbling out of the house, a beer can in one hand and a scowl etched across his face. His clothes were rumpled, his gait unsteady, but his tone was sharp. "That's my dog," he slurred, pointing a shaky finger at us. I stood, positioning myself between him and the dog. "This animal is in critical condition," I said firmly. "By law, we're allowed to remove her for immediate medical care." He laughed bitterly, taking another swig from his beer.
"She's fine.
"Just a guard dog. Cost me $300. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. Emotion wouldn't help here, it rarely did. "I'll give you $300, I said evenly, though the thought of paying this man made my stomach churn. He squinted at me, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "Make it $400. "Done," I said, pulling out my phone to transfer the money. The quicker I got this over with, the sooner we could get her out of here. The man grunted, stumbling back toward the house, and Dave handed me the bolt cutters. As I worked to free her, the chain resisted, its rusted links biting into her neck. "Almost there," I whispered, coaxing the terrified dog. When the chain finally fell away, she let out a small, pained sigh. Her body trembled as I gently lifted her into my arms, her head resting weakly against my chest. "She's lighter than she should be," I said to Dave as we moved toward the van. "Way too light." "Think she'll make it?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. I looked down at her, my resolve hardening. "She has to." In the van, I laid her on a blanket, stroking her matted fur as Dave started the engine. "You're safe now," I whispered. "I promise." As we pulled away from the desolate property, her tail gave the faintest wag, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to hope. The clinic lights were harsh, bouncing off the stainless steel tables and medical equipment. It smelled of antiseptic and hope, two scents I'd come to associate with late-night emergencies like this one.
Dr.
Harper, our trusted veterinarian, was already waiting for us. Her sharp eyes softened the moment she saw the dog. "She's critical, Dr." Harper said, not wasting a second as she slipped on gloves. "Get her on the table." Dave and I carefully lifted her onto the exam table. Up close, her condition was even worse than I'd imagined. Her neck was raw where the chain had been embedded, and deep cuts and sores covered her emaciated frame. Her temperature was alarmingly high, her breathing shallow. "Dr." Harper ran her hands gently over the dog's body, her expression growing grimmer with each new discovery. "Severe malnourishment, dehydration, multiple infections. She's hanging by a thread." I stepped closer, resting my hand on the dog's side. Her chest rose and fell, each breath a small miracle. "What can we do?" "We'll start fluids immediately, treat the wounds, and get her fever under control, Dr." Harper said, already barking orders to her team. "But it's touch and go." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Do whatever it takes." As the team worked, I lingered near the table, watching the dog's fragile form. Her resilience astounded me. How could she have survived this long? My thoughts drifted as I stood there, my mind tugged back to other rescues. Dogs like Luna, yes, I'd already decided to call her Luna, were all too common in my line of work. But something about her was different. Her tail wagged. Not much, but enough to tell me that she hadn't given up yet. Hours later, as the first rays of dawn peeked through the clinic windows, Luna was still with us. Her fever had stabilized, and the team had cleaned and bandaged her wounds. She was sedated now, her body finally given the chance to rest.
Dr.
Harper approached, pulling off her gloves. "She's a fighter," she said with a tired smile. "But it's going to be a long road." I exhaled, relief washing over me. She deserves that chance. As I sat by Luna's side, gently stroking her paw, the clinic doors opened. Helen Morrison walked in with her teenage daughter, Emily. Helen was one of our regular donors, and I'd reached out to her after Luna's rescue, knowing she might want to help. "This is her?" Helen asked softly, her gaze falling on Luna. I nodded. "She's been through hell, but she's fighting." Emily stepped closer, her movements tentative. She was a quiet, shy girl, and I'd always suspected she struggled with anxiety. But as she looked at Luna, her face lit up with something I hadn't seen before. Hope. "She's beautiful," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "She is," I agreed. Emily extended a hand, stopping just short of Luna's fur. I could see her hesitance, the fear of hurting such a fragile creature. But Luna surprised us both by shifting slightly, her nose brushing against Emily's fingers. Emily's eyes widened, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "She trusts me," she said, wonder filling her voice. "She trusts easily," I said, more to myself than to Emily. "Even when she shouldn't." It was a quiet moment, but it carried weight. In that instant, I saw the beginnings of something extraordinary, something that could heal not just Luna, but Emily as well. Luna's recovery began slowly, each step forward marked by quiet victories. After the first few critical days at the clinic, Dr. Harper approved her move to the Morrison farmhouse. It wasn't just about her physical healing anymore, it was about rebuilding her spirit, one trusting moment at a time. The farmhouse was a sanctuary. Nestled in the rolling hills of West Virginia, it was surrounded by open fields and shaded by towering oaks. Helen and Emily had prepared a cozy sunroom for Luna, complete with soft blankets and a bed positioned by a wide window overlooking the garden. It was the perfect space for a dog who needed to remember what it felt like to be safe. I stopped by on Luna's first day there, eager to see how she was adjusting. Helen greeted me at the door with a smile, leading me to the sunroom where Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, reading aloud. Luna lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, her ears perked slightly, as if she were listening. "She's already taken to Emily," Helen whispered, gesturing for me to follow her to the doorway. I stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. Emily's voice was soft but steady, her words painting the story of a brave knight and her loyal steed. Every now and then, Luna's tail would wag faintly, the corners of her mouth lifting in what almost looked like a smile. "She hasn't let me sit this close to her since we brought her home," Emily said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. "She sees something in you," I said, stepping into the room. "Animals like Luna, they don't trust easily. If she's letting you in, it's because she knows you're safe." The days turned into weeks, and Luna's transformation was slow but steady. Her once matted fur began to grow back soft and white, though the scars beneath remained. She learned to eat from her bowl without flinching, a sign that she was beginning to trust the world around her. Emily became her shadow, a quiet but steady presence who seemed to understand Luna's needs instinctively. Every evening, they would sit together in the garden, Emily reading aloud while Luna rested beside her. Their bond was a balm for them both, soothing the jagged edges of their respective wounds. One afternoon, I arrived with a box of supplies and found Emily and Luna in the backyard. Emily held a small squeaky toy, a simple blue bear I'd brought as a gift, and was coaxing Luna to take it. "It's okay, Luna," Emily murmured. "It's yours. You can play if you want." Luna tilted her head, her ears twitching as she eyed the toy. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out with her nose, nudging the bear until it squeaked. Emily laughed, a soft, surprised sound, and Luna wagged her tail in response. "She played," Emily said, looking up at me with wide eyes. "That's the first time she's played." I crouched beside them, marveling at the scene. "It's a big step," I said. "It means she's starting to feel like she belongs." Luna's gift for comforting others emerged not long after. One evening, as a storm rolled through, the Morrisons' other rescue dog, a skittish terrier named Max, began trembling in fear. Helen and I were in the kitchen when we noticed the unusual quiet. We found Luna lying next to Max in the corner of the living room. She rested her head lightly on his back, her presence a calming force that seemed to steady him. Max's trembling slowed, and he leaned into her, finding solace in her quiet strength. "She's amazing," Helen said softly. "She doesn't just heal. She helps others heal too." It was then that I began to see Luna not just as a survivor, but as something more, a guide, a source of light for those lost in their own darkness. Luna had come so far, but healing is never a straight path. Trauma doesn't disappear. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for a moment to resurface. And for Luna, those shadows could be triggered by the smallest thing. The first setback came during a summer thunderstorm. Dark clouds rolled in over the hills, and the first clap of thunder shook the farmhouse. Helen and I were in the kitchen discussing Luna's progress when we heard the frantic scrabbling of claws on the hardwood floor. "She's terrified," Helen said, her face tight with worry. We found Luna in the sunroom, crouched beneath a table, her body trembling violently. Her eyes darted around the room, and her breathing was shallow and panicked. "Luna," I called gently, crouching down to her level. "It's okay. You're safe." She didn't move, her fear so overwhelming it blocked out everything else. I reached out slowly, letting her see my hand. "It's me," I whispered. "I won't let anything hurt you." Emily appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "What's wrong with her?" "She's scared," I said, glancing at Emily. The storm brought it back, whatever she went through before. Without hesitation, Emily slid to the floor beside me. "Can I try?" I nodded, stepping back to give her space. Emily didn't speak right away. Instead, she sat quietly, letting Luna sense her presence. Then, in a soft, steady voice, she began to hum a melody, low and soothing, like a lullaby. Luna's trembling slowed. Her eyes shifted to Emily, her breathing evening out as the song wrapped around her like a blanket. "It's okay, Luna," Emily whispered. "I'm here." It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was a start. That night, Luna stayed close to Emily, her trust in the girl deepening in a way that even I hadn't anticipated. But not all setbacks came from storms. The smallest unexpected things, a clinking chain, the slam of a door, could send Luna spiraling. During one of my visits, a neighbor's laughter echoed across the yard, loud and sharp. Luna flinched, her tail tucking between her legs as she scrambled to the nearest corner. "She's afraid of men's voices," Helen observed, her brow furrowed. It wasn't surprising, but it was still heartbreaking. I knelt beside Luna, resting my hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," I said softly, repeating the words like a mantra. Later, I sat with Helen at the kitchen table, frustration gnawing at me. "I thought we were making progress," I said. "But every time she takes a step forward, it feels like the past pulls her back." Helen reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "Progress isn't about never falling," she said. "It's about learning to get back up." And Luna? She's been getting back up her whole life. The most profound moment came on a quiet afternoon. I was sitting in the garden with Emily and Luna when Emily turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think Luna will ever be normal?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean by normal?" "I mean, not afraid," Emily said, her voice hesitant. "Do you think she'll ever be like other dogs?" I looked at Luna, who was stretched out beside Emily, her head resting on the girl's lap. "I don't know," I admitted. "But maybe she doesn't have to be. Maybe Luna's strength comes from her scars, not in spite of them, but because of them." Emily seemed to consider this, her fingers brushing gently over Luna's fur. "I think you're right," she said finally. "Her scars make her beautiful." That night, as I drove back to my house, I couldn't shake Emily's words. Luna's scars were a testament to her survival, but they were also a bridge, connecting her pain to ours, her resilience to our hopes. And maybe that was enough. Luna's journey of healing had taken her further than I ever thought possible. Each day at the Morrison farm brought new signs of her resilience. But the most extraordinary part of Luna's recovery wasn't just her transformation, it was the way she began to transform the world around her. It started with Emily. Her quiet, reserved nature had always made her retreat from people, but her bond with Luna was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. The two were inseparable. Emily began bringing Luna with her on walks around the property, each step forward marking progress for both of them. "She's my brave buddy," Emily said one evening as we watched them together. "When I feel scared, I look at her, and I know I can handle it too." One day, Helen showed me Emily's laptop, her face glowing with pride. "You have to see this," she said, spinning the screen around. On the screen was a social media page filled with posts about Luna's journey. Emily had been quietly documenting Luna's progress, photos of her playing with her toy, videos of her comforting Max during storms, and heartfelt captions about resilience and healing. "I didn't even know she was doing this," Helen said, shaking her head with a smile. The posts were raw and honest, and they struck a chord. People from all over were commenting and sharing their own stories of overcoming trauma, inspired by Luna's journey. Donations began to trickle in, small amounts at first, then more as Luna's story gained traction. "She's gone viral," Helen said, her tone equal parts astonishment and amusement. I scrolled through the comments, my throat tightening. People weren't just responding to Luna's story, they were finding hope in it. "She's not just healing," I murmured. "She's helping others heal too." Luna's gift became undeniable one afternoon when a new rescue arrived at the farm, a skittish puppy named Daisy, barely more than skin and bones. She trembled at every sound, flinching whenever someone approached her. Helen and I were discussing how best to ease Daisy into her new environment when we noticed Luna. She had padded over to Daisy's crate and lay down quietly beside it. She didn't bark or whine. She simply rested there, her presence calm and steady. Daisy's trembling slowed. She peeked out from the corner of her crate, her wide eyes fixed on Luna. "She's doing it again," Helen whispered. I watched, my heart swelling with awe. "She knows what it's like to be afraid," I said. "She's showing Daisy it's okay to trust." As Luna's story spread, people began reaching out. Animal shelters asked for advice on handling traumatized dogs. Schools invited Emily to speak about Luna's impact on her own anxiety. Even mental health professionals started taking notice, seeing parallels between Luna's methods and therapy techniques. Emily, once too shy to speak up in class, stood confidently in front of a group of local students, Luna by her side. "Luna taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared," she said, her voice clear. "It means you keep going, even when you are." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emily's smile was reserved for Luna. The most remarkable moment came during a visit to the local shelter. Luna had accompanied me to meet a group of volunteers interested in learning more about animal rehabilitation. As we walked through the kennels, a sudden, panicked yelp caught her attention. Luna froze, her ears swiveling toward the sound. Then, without hesitation, she pulled gently on her leash, leading me to a kennel in the far corner. Inside was a terrified pit bull, huddled in the shadows, her eyes wide with fear. Luna sat down outside the kennel, her calm presence a stark contrast to the dog's panic. Slowly, the pit bull crept forward, her nose twitching as she took in Luna's scent. "She's amazing," one of the volunteers whispered. I nodded, my chest tight with emotion. Luna wasn't just a survivor, she was a healer, using her scars to guide others out of their own darkness. By the time we left the shelter that evening, I felt the first stirrings of a new dream, a sanctuary, a place where dogs like Luna could find safety and purpose. It wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a calling, and Luna was leading the way. For all her progress, there were moments when Luna's fragility caught us off guard. It was a reminder that healing isn't a straight line, it's a winding path with unexpected turns. One of those turns came on a crisp autumn morning. Helen called me in a panic. "Something's wrong with Luna," she said, her voice trembling. "She's lethargic and hasn't touched her food since last night." I rushed to the farmhouse, dread building with every mile. When I arrived, I found Luna lying in her sunroom, her head resting on her paws. She barely acknowledged me when I knelt beside her, her usual spark dimmed. "We need to get her to the clinic," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Emily appeared in the doorway, clutching Luna's favorite blue bear toy. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Is she going to be okay?" "We'll do everything we can," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The clinic was a flurry of activity.
DR.
Harper examined Luna with meticulous care, running tests and starting fluids to stabilize her. I paced the hallway outside the exam room, my mind racing. Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. Helen and Emily arrived soon after. Emily clutched the toy tightly, refusing to sit, her eyes glued to the exam room door. Hours later, DR. Harper emerged, her expression grim but hopeful. "She's developed an infection from one of her old wounds," she said. "It's serious, but we caught it in time. With treatment, she should pull through." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge of how close we'd come to losing her. Over the next few days, Luna's recovery was slow but steady. Emily insisted on staying by her side, reading to her and stroking her fur through the long nights. It was during one of those nights that something extraordinary happened. I had stayed late at the clinic, unable to bring myself to leave. I watched from the corner of the room as Emily sat cross-legged beside Luna's bed, her voice soft as she read aloud from one of her favorite books. "You saved me," Emily whispered, setting the book aside. "Now it's my turn to save you." Luna's tail twitched, just the faintest movement, but it was enough to bring tears to my eyes. As Luna's strength returned, so did her spirit. On her first day back at the Morrison farmhouse, she surprised us all by bounding into the garden, her tail wagging like it hadn't in weeks. "She's back," Emily said, laughing through her tears. But Luna wasn't just back. She was more determined than ever to help others. A week later, during a visit to the shelter, she approached a trembling terrier who had been too afraid to leave his crate since his arrival. Luna lay down beside him, her presence calm and reassuring. Slowly, the terrier crept out, nuzzling against her side. It was a moment of pure magic, and it solidified what I had known all along. Luna wasn't just a survivor. She was a healer, and her purpose was bigger than any of us had imagined. Inspired by Luna, Emily and Helen approached me with an idea. "We want to start a sanctuary," Helen said, her eyes shining. "A place where dogs like Luna can find safety and healing." It was a dream I'd had for years but had never thought possible. Now, standing in the Morrison sunroom with Luna resting at Emily's feet, it felt like the next natural step. "We'll call it Luna's Haven," Emily said, smiling down at the dog who had changed all our lives. The opening of Luna's Haven was a quiet, heartfelt affair, just the way it should have been. We stood at the edge of the lush new property, the sun rising behind us, casting golden light over the rows of kennels and wide-open fields. Helen, Emily, and I had worked tirelessly to bring this dream to life, and now it was real, a sanctuary for dogs who needed what Luna had found: safety, patience, and love. Luna herself was the centerpiece of the celebration. She wore a soft blue bandana embroidered with the words "From Survivor to Healer." Her tail wagged as she greeted the small crowd, her bright eyes scanning the faces of those who had gathered to witness the next chapter in her remarkable journey. "Welcome to Luna's Haven," Helen began, her voice carrying over the field. "This place is dedicated to the dogs who remind us that hope can grow even in the darkest circumstances." Emily stepped forward next, her hand resting gently on Luna's back. "Luna showed me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway. This haven is for the animals who need a little help finding that bravery." The applause was warm and genuine, but it was Luna who stole the moment. She padded over to the edge of the crowd and sat beside a small boy clutching his mother's hand. His eyes lit up as Luna leaned into him, her quiet presence dissolving the tension in his shoulders. "She knows exactly who needs her most," Helen said softly, watching the exchange. Over the following months, Luna became the heart of the sanctuary. Every new arrival was greeted with her calm, steady presence. Whether it was a terrified puppy or an aggressive stray, Luna had a way of reaching them. One day, I sat on the porch with Helen, watching Luna guide a limping beagle through the garden. "She's teaching us," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Helen nodded. "About more than dogs." She was right. Luna wasn't just helping animals heal, she was showing us how to face our own scars. Her patience reminded us to give ourselves grace. Her resilience taught us that strength comes from struggle. The most profound lesson came one quiet evening. Emily and I were sitting in the sunroom with Luna, who was sprawled contentedly on the floor, her head resting on Emily's lap. "Do you think Luna remembers everything she's been through?" Emily asked suddenly. I thought for a moment before answering. "I think she remembers, but not in the way we do. She doesn't carry it as pain anymore. She carries it as purpose." Emily nodded, her fingers brushing over Luna's fur. "Her scars make her beautiful," she said, echoing words she'd spoken weeks earlier. "They do," I agreed. "They remind us of how far she's come, and how far we can go too." That night, as I left the farmhouse, I paused to look back at the sunroom. The lights were low, and Emily was reading softly to Luna, her voice steady and calm. It was a peaceful tableau, one that spoke of hope and healing. Luna had found her haven, and in doing so, she had created one for so many others, humans and animals alike. As I drove home, I thought about the lesson she had taught me, the one I carried with me now. Scars aren't the end of the story. They're the beginning of something beautiful.